Greetings, this is Doc Ock coming at you live and direct tonight from Black Facts Headquarters Central with another installment of Doc Ock at noon and 9. Well, this presentation is coming to you by popular demand. I have had so many phone calls and messages I've gotten from people wondering where was I at tonight at 9 o'clock. Well, I'm going to tell you. Tonight at 9 o'clock, I was at the laundromat. And as many of you know, I do not have a cell phone, so I could not tell my story from the laundromat. But I was bound and determined to answer all those messages of people clamoring for me to finish telling the story of Biddy Mason. So here I am, late as it is. I'm going to tell it before the midnight hour rings in. So let's get this party started. First of all, you know what we need you to do. Go ahead, give us a like if you're watching on Facebook, a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube, and then go ahead, spread the word far and wide that Black Facts is still here, and we're about to take you for a ride. Proverb, tonight we don't have a proverb. Tonight we have a song, a Bao Song from Kisingitini, Kenya. And the song is in Kiswahili, so I'll read it in Kiswahili. I'll recite it in Kiswahili as if it's a poem, and then I will recite it in English. Kula mvuvi pweza, mdirikano mwambani, kula mchezi wa bao, madirikano baoni, or bounty. All the fishers of octopus, their meeting place is the rock. All the players of Bao, their meeting place is the board. There you have it. A Bao song from Kisingitini, Kenya. And for those of you who don't recall, I'll just give you a quick reminder that Bao is the game that we play on the board. So when I say Bao Kucheza, right, that must mean the, no, what did I say? I said Kula Mchezi. Kula Mchezi wa Bao. The players of Bao. Kula Mchezi wa Bao. Right? Players of the Bao. The world's oldest board game. Thousands of years old, played all over the world. We've documented it in at least 108 countries around the world. Now, let's go ahead and continue with the story of Biddy Mason. That's right. We're going to tell you the story of an old Biddy. Although at this time, she was much younger than she would be if she was still alive today. Of course, she'd be very old if she was alive today. So, I'm sure she's thankful that she's not still around, because that would kind of be a drag. All right, and here we go. When last we were reading about her, yeah, I don't think we got to this page here. Oh, wait a minute, maybe we did. Well, I'm going to reread this part. So if I read this part already, I'm just going to reread this part. For a few days, Biddy could just stop and think. Perhaps she wondered if she and her daughters should have stayed in Mississippi. Probably she wondered how she would be asked to help the people she would meet in Utah Territory. Oops, almost forgot. There we go. Certainly, she wondered what life would be like there. They had almost reached St. Louis when the boat got stuck on a sandbar. There was only one thing to do: throw the animals overboard until the boat floated higher. They threw 12 terrified mules into the river before the boat was free. But mules can swim, and they were happily eating grass by the time the boat's captain found a place to land, this time on purpose. A few days later, the wagons rumbled west from St. Louis, 450 miles to winter quarters, and still they would not be even halfway to Utah. The rain stopped as the wagon train plodded 200 miles west toward the Missouri River. Wagon wheels and animal hooves turned the dry dirt into a cloud of dust which hung behind the wagons, right where Biddy was. She couldn't decide whether it was worse to be sloshing through the mud when it was raining or to be in a dust cloud when it was dry. When they reached the Missouri River, the wagons turned north to go 250 miles beside the river to Canesville, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Finally, at the end of May, Biddy helped load wagons, animals, and people onto the ferry boats at Canesville. They floated west across the Missouri River to the Mormon winter quarters in what would become Nebraska territory, close by the Omaha Indian Reservation. My company has now gone 917 miles, Mr. Brown wrote in his journal. He wrote that they had no deaths, one birth, and little sickness except a bit of chills and fever. He wrote that one ox had broken its neck. He didn't trouble to write how well Biddy had cared for the people in his company. At winter quarters, Biddy's small group joined several hundred other people going to Utah. Biddy knew there was a long, hard walk ahead. There would be no stores where they could buy sugar or flour or salt or matches if they ran out. She made sure the Smiths had everything they would need packed carefully into their wagons. She made sure the other slaves were as ready as they could be. She made sure her supply of plants and herbs was safely packed in her bag, probably including new plants she learned about from the Omaha Indians. By the end of June, all the wagons were repaired, loaded, and ready to cross the prairie. On July 1st, drivers shouted to their teams, children danced with glee, and the whole company, Mr. Brown wrote, moved on to the prairie. Crossing the prairie. Okay, so chapter 3, Crossing the Prairie. The prairie was an ocean of grass. As the wind blew, the grass bowed down and rose up like waves at sea. The white canvas covers of the wagons bobbed back and forth like sailing ships. The grass was so tall in some places that a person on horseback could get lost in it. But it soon became shorter and shorter the further west the wagons moved. Biddy tied a rag over her nose and mouth to keep the dust out, and made Ellen and Ann do the same. She wore a sunbonnet to shade her face and neck from the blazing July sun. The stronger Mormon women, also wearing sunbonnets, walked beside their wagons to spare the oxen. Anyway, they said it was more comfortable to walk than to ride inside the jolting, bake oven wagons. The trail was right beside the Platte River, but the ground was as dry as a burr patch. Dust hung in the air where the wagons passed. Day after day, the western prairie stretched before them like a vast tabletop. Heat waves rose up as if from a sizzling skillet. Day after day, the oxen plodded on, and the wagons rumbled forward on squeaking wheels. Biddy and her daughters were soaked with sweat, covered with mosquito bites, caked with dust. They ran back and forth to keep the cows and mules together and moving in the right direction. Sometimes Biddy asked Ellen and Ann to watch their little sister. Harriet could toddle along the trail now, slowly, and Ellen and Anne had to be sure she didn't fall under a heavy wooden wagon wheel or put a small hand into a rattlesnake's hole. Biddy had already seen graves by the trail. She promised herself and her girls they would get to Utah safely. Every night when her work was done and she had checked that all was well with the wagons and the people in them, Biddy lay on her blanket and looked at the stars flung out over the great black sky. Far away, wolves howled. Close by, coyotes barked. Biddy's eyes closed, and then, it seemed, no sooner had she fallen asleep than the morning bugle sounded for prayers, and the day began all over again. Biddy's job herding the animals became harder the further west they traveled. Each day the sun blazed hotter, the grass was sparser, and the animals were more thirsty and hungry. The only rest came when they nooned in the shade of the cottonwoods along the murmuring Platte River. After more days of walking, the prairie grass came to an end, and the dry ground was dotted with sagebrush and cactus. The cows began dying, and Biddy could not help them. The wagons pushed on through the sand hills, leaving behind dead cows for the wolves and vultures. Then one August morning, Biddy saw mountains far off in the distance, and the rising sun glowed pink on the first snowy peaks Biddy had ever seen. Days later, the wagons rode into Fort Laramie in Wyoming Territory. From Fort Laramie, the wagon train began the last part of the journey. Biddy drove the animals over high deserts and mountains, through meadows of flowers, and past rock-filled streams that ran along the bottom of narrow canyons. The wagon train climbed the rocky Wasatch Mountains. The rain on Biddy's face felt colder and colder the higher they climbed. Before long, the rain turned to a storm of icy sleet and snow. The oxen slipped and crashed to their knees as they leaned forward, trying to pull the wagons up the muddy, freezing trail. Ellen and Anne were so tired that Biddy held their hands and pulled them along with her behind the staggering animals, while Harriet clung to her back. She heard sobs from the weary women plodding along beside the wagons ahead. In the first week of October, Biddy and her girls stood with the other exhausted pioneers on the last mountaintop and looked down into a wide valley with a vivid blue lake. Songs, prayers, and shouts of joy filled the clear air. Biddy hugged her girls tight. They were almost there. Now the wagons bounced down the steep mountain. They skidded between boulders and rocks, oak trees and pine trees. The drivers clung desperately to ropes and chains, trying to keep their wagons from hurtling away from them. Smoke curled up from the wooden brakes, pressing on the wheels. Grasshoppers and crickets whirred up in Biddy's face as she slid down the mountain behind the wagons. Clinging to bushes and branches, her girls slipped and tumbled behind her. At the foot of the mountain, they struggled through one last canyon, and then the wide valley was in front of them. The Great Salt Lake lay like a blue-silver band in the distance. Ribbons of steam rose from hot springs far to the north. Biddy heard shouts from the front of the wagon train. Mormon pioneers who had made the very first journey the year before were coming to meet them. The shouts passed down the whole train, and suddenly men, women, and children were screaming, crying, dancing, even fainting from excitement. They had done it. Biddy didn't scream or cry or faint, but she certainly felt like dancing. She had brought her daughters and every other person she was responsible for safely all the way. Biddy, her girls, and the whole wagon train camped in Immigration Canyon outside Great Salt Lake City. The next morning, the Smiths and their slaves and most of those in John Brown's group moved to a huge empty space between the two tall cottonwood trees on Cottonwood Creek. There, 2,000 miles in 7 months from Mississippi, they stopped. The journey was over. Now the pioneers had to get ready for winter in their new settlement by the cottonwoods. Slave and Mormon men chopped down trees, sawed up logs, and built log cabins in the cold November sunshine and even colder rain. Biddy unpacked the barrels and boxes. She washed the prairie mud and sand out of the Smith's clothes. She heated the flat iron and ironed the clothes. She carried pots and pans, bedding, and Mrs. Smith's spinning wheel into the Smith's new log cabin. Biddy and her daughters probably had a little log cabin of their own behind the Smith's cabin, as a few other slaves did. At Cottonwood Creek, there were several Mississippi families with slaves. The Mormon church in Utah had no law about slavery, and church leaders weren't sure what to do about the slaves. Finally, they decided that if a slave wanted to leave his or her master, the master must let the slave go in peace. Go in peace. My children, go in peace. But the Mormon leaders added, all the slaves that are there appear to be perfectly contented and satisfied. Why would they want to go anywhere? They're perfectly happy right here being slaves. Yeah. It's not known if Mr. Smith told his slaves they could choose to leave. Probably he didn't. None of them left, and Biddy and her friend Hannah both remained slaves to the Smith family. Biddy had many responsibilities to manage for the Smiths, and she was happiest when she could do things for them and for others. Biddy's daughters were growing up healthy and strong, just like their mama. Biddy still thought she and her girls were all treated well, for slaves, that is. Hannah thought the same. It's also likely that Mr. Smith was the father of Hannah's children as well. Life was hard at Cottonwood Creek. Grasshoppers ate every single thing they could, from vegetable gardens to plow handles. Grasshoppers ate every single thing they could, from vegetable gardens to plow handles. Now, if you can imagine a grasshopper eating a plow handle, that's some serious grasshopper. I don't know what kind of grasshoppers those are, but I hope I never run into them in a dark alley, though. I can tell you that much. The summers were fearfully hot and dry. Salt and scratchy dust hurt Biddy's throat and made her girls cough. In winter, the icy winds were so fierce the salt spray from the lake blew all the way into the Great Salt Lake City, 12 miles away, and snow stayed for months. But when spring came, Biddy went out looking for new plants and herbs for her medicine bag and her garden. The mountain streams were so clear she could see the pebbles on the bottom. Quaking aspen trees stood in groups with silvery green leaves and bark as white as paper. The river banks were covered with willows, birch trees, tall pines, and beautiful, brilliant red maples. Biddy thought her new home was beautiful. So you can imagine how shocked she was when 3 years later, Mr. Smith says he's ready to up and move again. We'll say that for tomorrow night. Meanwhile, all you little children out there know what time it is. If you haven't already, then you know it's time by now for you to lay your little head on your little pillow, on your little bed, and close those your eyes while you wait on that sun to rise. And when you feel those sunbeams beaming down on your eyes, you know that it's time for you to rise and shine, oh chill in the mind. And in the meantime, all you adults out there, we still need your avid support and helping us to continue doing what we're trying to do over here. It is difficult. I have to say, this has some challenges that have been involved, and we're trying to meet every last one. But doing a one-man show, this ain't exactly easy peasy lemon squeezy. Let me just tell you that. So it may look easy when you see it on whatever platform you're on, but this is about some hard work and dedication. Because I tell you what, I'd rather be eating dinner right now and getting ready to go to bed, because I still got clothes to fold and hang up to dry. because all my clothes didn't dry at the laundromat tonight. So after I finish doing this, that's what I'm going to do. Eat and hang up my clothes. But in the meantime, I hope this story keeps you on your toes while you do your do-si-dos. And I hope it points your nose in the right direction. The next time somebody tells you how hard life is, you'll be able to tell them something about Biddy Mason. Because remember, everything I've read so far, all this traveling she did, they did 2,000 miles from Mississippi to Utah. Biddy Mason did it barefoot. And so did her young daughters, the 10-year-old and the 5-year-old and the 3-year-old. They did that barefoot. Think about it. Think about it. Hard life. Talking about they didn't, all the slaves were happy. Man, get out of here. What are they talking about? They got to be kidding. So let me just say, Tuta Nana to Aphrodisia Baba. I see you over there. And Imani Zaire. And who else was over there? Solomon Israel. All right, Solomon. And we're praying for your mom too, my brother. In the meanwhile, peace out without a doubt to all of you good people out there. Keep on supporting us. Keep on loving the stories that we're telling. And make sure, last but not least, pass these stories on. It doesn't do us any good if you keep it all to yourself. This is all about each one teach one, each one reach one. Peace out with justice. Because anything less disgusts us.